People used to say David and I were the solid couple. You know the type. The ones who host dinner parties that run late into the night, where the wine flows and the laughter feels easy. I loved having people over. Friends, old and new, always had a seat at our table. And David? He was charming. Always refilling glasses, helping in the kitchen, knowing just when to lean in with a joke. We looked like a perfect team. But looking back, I wonder if that version of us ever really existed. Maybe it was a performance. Maybe I was the only one who didn't realize it was all just smoke and mirrors. I remember this one afternoon. Nothing special, just a normal, quiet day. I was doing laundry, folding clothes fresh out of the dryer. And that's when I found it. Something that didn't belong. It was lace. Not mine. Not a brand I wear. Not a size I fit. I held it in my hand for a long time, just staring, trying to convince myself it was some mistake. Maybe it had gotten mixed in from a guest's bag. Maybe it clung to a towel or sheet. But deep down, I knew. The color drained from my face before I could even form the first excuse. Because I'd seen that underwear before, in Julia's suitcase during a girls' weekend. Same color, same label, same size. My stomach twisted. You know that slow, sinking feeling that starts in your chest and spreads like a cold wave? That was it. It wasn't just the underwear. It was everything that started clicking into place after. The friends who had drifted, the ones who stopped replying, the sudden awkwardness in their eyes when I'd mentioned David. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. But that day, something cracked open. And once it did, I couldn't unsee what had been there all along. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even confront him. Not yet. Instead, I did what I always do when something feels off. I started organizing. Not drawers or closets this time, but memories. Interactions. Patterns. I made a list, a literal list, of every close friend I'd brought into our home over the last few years. And then I started reaching out, one by one, pretending I was just missing them, trying to reconnect. Some didn't answer. Others were polite, but distant, like they were walking on eggshells. A few seemed genuinely nervous to hear from me. That's when I knew. It wasn't in what they said. It was in the pauses. The weird energy. The way some of them tried to steer the conversation away from the past, like they were afraid of what I already suspected, and they were right to be. Piece by piece, the picture came together. Screenshots, old text threads, photos buried in my phone from parties or trips where their hands lingered too long. But the worst part wasn't the confirmation. It was the sheer volume. It wasn't just one mistake, or even two. It was almost all of them. Every woman I had let close. Every friend I had trusted in our home. He had touched nearly every corner of my life and made it rot from the inside out. There's a moment when betrayal stops being a shock and just becomes exhausting. That's where I was. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, phone in one hand, an old photo in the other, a birthday dinner years ago, all smiles, all lies. I wasn't even angry yet. I just felt hollow. Like someone had scooped me out quietly while I wasn't paying attention. I kept whispering the same thing, over and over, without realizing. Not even one. Not even one friend he didn't touch. You think you'd know, right? That you'd feel it. Some shift in the air, some instinct whispering that the person you sleep next to isn't who you thought. But the truth is quieter than that. It's in the way he smiled at me the same way he smiled at them. In how easily I mistook familiarity for love. I thought I was careful with my heart, but I'd handed it over piece by piece without even noticing, and he used it like currency. There was one moment that hit harder than the rest. I was scrolling through an old message thread with my friend Elise, one of my closest, years ago. The last message from her was short. "I can't do this anymore, Clara. Please don't ask why." At the time, I thought she was just overwhelmed, maybe pulling back from everyone. I blamed myself for not trying harder to fix it, but now I saw it for what it was. Guilt. She couldn't face me. I started to see our entire life together differently. Every smile at a party, every toast at a dinner table, all laced with a poison I hadn't tasted until now. I was watching my own memories rot in real time. And David, he still walked around like everything was fine, still kissed my forehead in the morning, still asked if I wanted tea before bed. As if he hadn't turned our life into a performance, and me into the only one who didn't know it was a play. But I know now. I know everything. And knowing changes you. It doesn't just break your heart, it rewires it. I stopped wondering why he did it. I started wondering what I would do next, because when someone burns down your world so thoroughly, the only question left is, what do you build from the ashes? You'd be surprised how easy it is to pretend. Smile. Laugh. Stir the sauce a little too long. Keep your voice light when he asks how your day was. I slipped into that role like an old sweater, the doting wife, humming to herself while making dinner, acting like nothing was burning beneath the surface. And he bought it. Hook, line, and blindfold. That's the part that still stings. How little it took to fool him back. I kissed him like I meant it. I made plans for the weekend. I even suggested we invite someone over. Someone I hadn't seen in ages. One of the names from my list. He grinned. That same damn grin he used on all of us. Said it sounded lovely, and I smiled too because now I was watching him. Really watching. The way his body leaned in. The tiny flicker in his eyes. All the little cues I used to think were charming. They were weapons, and I was learning how to disarm them. Behind the scenes I was collecting. Screenshots, voicemails, bits of conversations I had with women who once swore they'd never hurt me. Some came clean. Tearful, ashamed, broken in their own way. Others denied it, even when I sent them the photos. It wasn't like that, they'd say. But it was exactly like that. And I recorded everything. Not to ruin them. I didn't need revenge on all of them. Just the truth. Documented. Undeniable. Mine. Then came Sophie. My Sophie. My maid of honor. My college roommate. The woman who held my hand when I was in labor. Who helped me write the vows. I saved her for last. Maybe some part of me was hoping she'd be the exception. But no. She cried when I confronted her. Didn't even try to lie. That night after she left, I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at me was already gone. What was left was something else entirely. After Sophie, I didn't cry, not even a tear. I think I'd finally run out. It was like I had stepped outside my own body and was watching someone else's life burn down in slow motion. I wasn't the grieving wife anymore. I was the observer, the strategist. Every morning I woke up next to him and pretended not to flinch. I made coffee. I wore perfume. I asked about his meetings. But inside, I was building something far more dangerous than rage. I was building clarity. He still thought he had me. That's the wild part. He still kissed my shoulder in the morning, still left little notes by the sink like nothing had shifted. But the truth? I had already disappeared. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, spiritually, whatever you want to call it. The Clara he thought he married had slipped through the cracks. What remained was someone colder, quieter, patient in a way she had never been before. I started keeping a journal, not for my feelings. Those were scorched beyond use. I kept it for facts, times, names, notes about how his mood changed depending on who was coming over. I treated it like field work. I even gave the whole operation a name in my head. Project Vanish. It made me feel like I had a purpose again. Like I was doing something instead of just drowning in silence. I wasn't crying into wine glasses anymore. I was laying bricks for what came next. And what came next had to be perfect. It wasn't enough to confront him. Not after what he'd taken from me. Not after the years, the trust, the friendships. If he wanted to play with people like they were disposable, like I was disposable, then fine. Let him feel what it's like when the person he underestimated decides to stop playing nice. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to set the stage. There's a strange power in pretending, in watching someone lie to your face while you know everything, every message, every touch, every betrayal. I started enjoying it. Not in a cruel way. Not exactly. But there was something almost theatrical about it. Like I was in a play, and he didn't know I'd rewritten the script. I watched how he moved, how he poured wine when certain women were around, how his laugh shifted when he thought I wasn't paying attention, and I used it, every detail. I invited another old friend over, one of the quieter ones, someone he wouldn't think twice about. I told her I wanted to reconnect, that I missed her. She showed up nervous, fidgety, eyes darting toward him when he spoke. But I was calm. I offered her tea. I smiled. And I watched how he flirted right in front of me, barely veiled, like I was invisible. That was the moment I stopped second-guessing myself. I knew exactly who he was now. I waited until she left to take out the small recorder I had hidden in the planter. His voice was crystal clear, the compliment, the suggestion, the "don't tell Clara" that made my stomach lurch. It didn't even hurt anymore. It was just data, proof, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place, and as I replayed that clip over and over, something inside me solidified. Not hate, not even vengeance, just resolve. The kind you only get when you've lost too much to care what it costs. I stood in the kitchen that night and whispered something I didn't realize I meant until I said it out loud. If he wanted to break something, I'll show him what it means to be shattered. Then I wiped down the counter, turned off the lights, slipped into bed beside him, heart steady, breath calm. I kissed his cheek goodnight. He murmured something soft, something meaningless. And I smiled into the dark, because the countdown had already begun. I told him I was planning a surprise for our 10-year anniversary. Something special, intimate, just close friends and family, the ones who meant the most to us. He looked touched, a little guilty even. Maybe he thought the years had dulled my edge, that I had softened. He kissed my hand and said, "You always make things beautiful." And I smiled, because he had no idea just how beautiful this was going to be. Behind the scenes, I reached out to each woman, one by one, not to accuse, not to scream, just a simple message. "I'm throwing a surprise anniversary party for David. Would love for you to come. It's small, very personal. You're part of our history." Most of them said yes immediately. I could almost hear the relief in their replies, like being invited absolved them of something. Like I was offering them a clean slate. Every invitation was handcrafted to feel exclusive. Some thought they were the only ones being invited. That was the point. I wanted them to walk through the front door and realize, all at once, that they weren't special, that they were one of many, the way I had been one of one, the only one who hadn't known. I planned everything down to the last candle. The food, the seating, the timing. It had to be flawless. David, of course, was beaming, told his coworkers his wife was planning something sweet, asked if he should wear the blue suit or the gray. I said gray. It felt more appropriate. He didn't question why I was smiling so much, why I had that extra glint in my eye. He thought I was happy, and I was, just not for the reason he believed. There's a strange kind of freedom in watching someone walk straight into a reckoning they helped design. The night of the party felt electric. Not in the romantic, candlelit way. No, this was something sharper. Like the air before a storm. I dressed slowly, deliberately. Light makeup, hair pinned just right. I wore the dress he once said made me look dangerous in the best way. It felt poetic. As the first guests arrived, I greeted them with warmth. Like nothing was wrong. Like I wasn't standing in the center of a trap with my arms wide open. I watched their eyes as they entered. The slight panic when they recognized someone else from the past, someone they thought would never be invited to the same room again. The way glances darted across the crowd, the nervous laughter. You could feel the tension ripple through the wine glasses. David didn't notice. Not yet. He was too busy playing host, clinking drinks, soaking in the praise of a man who had it all. I let him bask. Then it was time. I tapped my glass, smiling like I had just remembered something sweet. The room quieted. David stood beside me, his hand lightly on my back. I began talking about love, about trust, about what it means to share a life with someone, To let them into every room inside you, even the ones with locked doors. People nodded. Some smiled. David squeezed my hand, and I felt nothing. Nothing but focus. And then I said it. Before we toast, I thought it might be nice to share a tribute to our beautiful memories. I gestured to the projector as the lights dimmed. And yours, David. His hand dropped. I didn't look at him. I faced the screen. And then, one by one, the truths began to play. Messages, photos, screen recordings, confessions, some tearful, some bitter. The air left the room like a switch had been flipped. It was almost silent at first. That stunned kind of quiet, where no one knows what to do with their hands or their eyes. A few gasps, one broken wine glass. The footage kept rolling. Snippets of texts layered with screenshots, overlapping voices from recordings. Names, dates, faces. I'd stitched it all together like a surgeon. No blood, just clean, clinical truth. The kind you can't unsee once it's out in the open. Some guests turned away. Others stared, wide-eyed, frozen. I didn't look at David until the final clip ended. I wanted that image burned in. Him, pale and blinking, trying to process the collapse of his carefully curated world. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at me like a man drowning in air, and I finally looked back, not with fury, not with pain, just with the certainty of someone who no longer needed to explain. He whispered something, I think. I didn't catch it. Maybe it was my name. Maybe it was a plea. I stepped forward, took his hand gently, and said loud enough for the room to hear, "Now we're even." Then I let go. People started talking, some shouting. A couple of the women ran out. Someone in the back muttered, "Jesus Christ," and still, David didn't move. He just stood there shaking, like he couldn't decide whether to sit or fall. I left him standing there, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. I didn't make a speech. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked into the kitchen, where the playlist had kept playing, soft jazz humming under the weight of the aftermath. I poured myself a glass of wine, and for the first time in years, I drank it alone, uninterrupted. The doorbell rang again, but I didn't move. The party was over. The story, though, wasn't finished. The fallout came fast. Word spread like fire through dry grass. People whispered, texted, forwarded clips. Someone had filmed part of the projector video on their phone. Of course they had. And suddenly, David's face was everywhere. The charming, dependable husband turned cautionary tale. Friends stopped answering his calls. Colleagues distanced themselves. Even the neighbor who once asked him to babysit their dog now crossed the street to avoid him. I filed for divorce 3 days later. No warning, no note. Just a signature delivered through my lawyer with the kind of efficiency David had never expected from me. He tried to delay, tried to meet. I declined. He asked if we could at least talk it through like adults. I didn't respond. In court, I sat perfectly still while my attorney laid everything out. I didn't have to say a word. The documentation spoke for itself. And when it was over, I walked away with almost everything. People kept calling me brave, said I was strong, that they admired the way I exposed the truth. But none of it felt like victory. It felt like survival, like crawling out of a burning house barefoot. I smiled when they congratulated me, nodded politely, said, "Thank you, I'm doing okay." But deep down, I was still walking through the ruins, counting the pieces, the losses, the echoes of trust I'd never get back. David didn't go quietly, though. He started small, flowers, left at my door, then cards, then long letters, pages and pages begging me to remember the real us, saying he made mistakes but never stopped loving me. He said he was broken, that he was scared, that I was his home. I never answered. I never even read most of them, but I kept them. Locked in a box at the back of my closet, not as keepsakes, as evidence of who he really was and of who I'd never be again. Everyone thought it was over, that I had gotten justice, found closure, moved on. In a way I had. I signed the papers. I changed my last name back. I moved into a smaller apartment across town, quiet, filled with light, no ghosts in the walls. I bought furniture one piece at a time, choosing things just for me: a velvet chair, a navy kettle, a lamp with a soft golden glow that made evenings feel warm, even when I didn't. I started writing again. Just little things at first, scraps of scenes, journal entries I didn't intend to share. But the words kept coming. They poured out like water through a cracked dam. So I gave them a name: What We Don't See. A novel, maybe, or just a confession in disguise. I didn't write about David directly. I wrote about a woman who vanishes without ever leaving. A woman who watches her life through glass and one day decides to break it. People around me wanted updates. "How are you really doing, Clara?" they'd ask with soft eyes, like I might shatter if they looked too hard. I smiled, said I was rediscovering myself. And in a way, I was. I traveled. Nothing dramatic, just small escapes. A bookstore in Lisbon, a cafe in Prague. I sat alone and let strangers brush past me, nameless and harmless. There was peace in that, in being unknown again. And yet, some nights were still heavy. I'd open the closet, stare at the box of letters, and wonder why I hadn't thrown it into the sea. But I never touched it, never reread them. I think part of me kept it as a reminder, not of him, but of the version of me who thought love meant staying. That version had died quietly, in between forgotten anniversaries and lipstick-stained wine glasses. What was left was someone I was only just starting to meet. Some people kept waiting for me to fall apart. Like I'd delayed the grief and it was bound to catch up eventually. But it didn't. Because the grief had already come and gone, not in one sweeping breakdown, but in slow, silent days of unraveling while I still had to smile across the dinner table. The collapse had happened before anyone noticed. What they were seeing now was just construction. The slow rebuild of someone they never truly knew. I didn't rush into anything. No dating. No revenge posts. I didn't become that woman who glowed up after the divorce. I just became quiet, intentional. I took long walks with no destination. I learned how to cook for one without calling it lonely. I filled shelves with books I never had time to read when my life was a constant performance. I breathed. I let my hair grow. I stopped asking for permission to be at peace. And just when the dust seemed to settle, when people stopped whispering and the letters stopped arriving, I started sleeping through the night again. Not every night, but some. I'd wake up and forget, for a few seconds, that there was ever a version of my life where I didn't know what betrayal looked like in daylight. That forgetting felt like progress, like healing wasn't a finish line, but a series of soft, unfinished moments. The manuscript for What We Don't See grew longer by the week. I didn't know if I'd ever publish it. That wasn't the point. It was just mine. A quiet testimony. A map through the wreckage. And I told myself gently that the worst was behind me, that I'd face the fire and come out whole. I believed that. I needed to. Until one rainy afternoon, someone knocked on my door. It was a gray afternoon, the kind where time feels slower, like the sky forgot how to turn the page. I was editing a chapter, sipping coffee that had gone cold, wrapped in a cardigan that still smelled faintly like lavender. There was nothing remarkable about that moment. Just silence, just calm. And then came the knock. Soft, almost hesitant. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a second, I thought maybe it was a neighbor, or a delivery. When I opened the door, I forgot how to breathe. Julia was standing there. Julia, the first thread that had unraveled everything. She looked older somehow. Fragile, like life had been clawing at her quietly. In her arms was a child, a boy, maybe 1 or 2 years old. He had David's eyes, that same steel blue gaze that once felt like safety. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, holding that child like a secret that had finally outgrown the silence. I stepped aside without thinking, not because I forgave her, not because I understood, but because her face, the way it crumbled when I met her eyes, told me this wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. She sat on the couch, the child still asleep against her chest. I poured tea with trembling hands, and when I sat across from her, she whispered the words I didn't know I needed and hated to hear all at once. "I didn't come here to make excuses." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "He told me you always knew, that you let it happen, that it was some kind of open thing. I thought you were cruel, Clara. I thought you wanted me to hurt, but I see now, I didn't know anything." She looked down at the boy, then back at me. "He's David's. I didn't want you to find out like this, but I couldn't carry it alone anymore." And suddenly I felt it, not rage, not relief, just an ache so deep it barely had a name. I didn't scream. I didn't throw her out. I didn't ask 1,000 questions, even though they spun in my head like leaves in a storm. I just sat there, the teacup warm in my hands, trying to breathe through the pressure building behind my ribs. He had a child, a son, and for almost 2 years I hadn't known. Or maybe some part of me did. Maybe that's why I kept the letters. Maybe I was always waiting for something else to break. Julia looked wrecked. Her hands trembled as she laid the baby gently onto the couch cushion, her voice low and trembling. "He said so many things, Clara. Manipulated every truth until I couldn't tell where guilt ended and love began. I thought I was different. I thought he needed me. But he lied to me the same way he lied to you. I see that now." She looked at the child. "He never even asked about him after we stopped." I watched her. This woman who had once been part of my inner circle, who had helped me choose centerpieces and folded my laundry during sleepovers. I should have hated her. Maybe a small part of me still did. But there was something else now, something deeper. A quiet, shared devastation that blurred the lines between enemy and victim. She had believed him too, and she had paid a different kind of price for it. The baby stirred, fussed, then settled again. I looked at him, really looked, and for a brief, disorienting second, I saw the life that could have been mine. Not with David, never again, but with truth, with clarity, with something honest. Julia wiped her eyes. "I don't know what I'm asking for. I just didn't want to lie anymore." I nodded slowly, still staring at the boy. "You didn't come to ask," I said, finally. "You came to give me something I didn't know I needed." We didn't talk much after that. Not about the past, not about him. Some truths are too heavy to say more than once. Julia stayed for a while, long enough to finish her tea, long enough for the child to wake up and reach for my necklace with tiny, curious fingers. I didn't flinch. I just smiled and let him tug at it, his soft breath warming my collarbone. Something shifted inside me. Not a crack this time, but something softer. Something like release. Before they left, I asked Julia if she had somewhere safe to go. She nodded, said she just needed to see me first. That she had been carrying guilt like a second skin, and it had started to strangle her. I walked them to the door, my hand resting lightly on the baby's back as he drifted in and out of sleep. And as they stepped into the hallway, Julia turned. "He doesn't know who his father is," she said quietly, "and I don't think he ever will." I stood there for a moment after the door closed, listening to the silence. Then I walked back inside and lit a fire. The box was still where I had left it, tucked in the corner of the closet, layered in dust and forgotten things. I didn't open the letters. I didn't reread the apologies. I simply fed them, one by one, to the flames. Watched them curl and blacken and disappear. No ceremony, no drama, just a clean, final goodbye. As the last ember faded, I poured a glass of wine and returned to the kitchen. Julia had left a small pacifier behind, resting on the edge of the table. I held it for a long time. Then I sat down, lit a candle, and began to plate a quiet meal for one. Or maybe not just one anymore. Not enemies, not broken women. Just survivors of the same lie, finally breathing in a room with no more secrets. Some betrayals you expose. Others, you outgrow.